Now, when people talk about ADHD and nutrition, protein is often something that comes up, and it's for very good reason. I do understand that only focusing on the what is half of the equation, and that's something that I really focus on with my clients in session because, yes, it's nice to know what foods and the reasons why and all that jazz. Obviously, it's my job as a dietitian, but I do also understand that talking about the how and looking at how you can actually integrate it as part of your life and making it, realistic and attainable is so crucial as well. Welcome back to the We Don't Know Yet podcast, where we're on a mission to break down the barriers to good health one episode at a time. If you're watching this from the YouTube, you'll notice that I am in a new background today. I'm actually recording from my home because think of this as a little surprise or bonus episode. It's also part 1 of 3 of a special ADHD nutrition series that I'll be bringing you. Bonus points for anyone that can count the number of times I say ADHD in this episode. In each episode within this series, I'll be zoning in on a particular nutrient that's been researched in relation to ADHD and then giving you one ADHD-friendly strategy to help you take that information and actually make it a part of your routine. Before we dive in though, just a quick reminder, while I will be focusing on particular nutrients in this series, as always, it's not about chasing perfection or micromanaging your meals. A well-rounded diet, so that's one that includes a variety of different foods and food groups, is always key. This isn't about, creating more rules or rigidity within your day-to-day. It's more just little bits of information that I invite you to take from what you will. And if you're also new around here, hey, my name's Maddi. I'm a non-diet and disordered eating dietitian, an ADHDer myself, which is why I'm particularly passionate about this area of nutrition. I'm also the co-host of this very podcast with my good friend and colleague, Zeb Jarvis. So if you're new here, welcome. And without further ado, let's get stuck in. Today, we're kicking things off with protein. Now, when people talk about ADHD and nutrition, protein is often something that comes up, and it's for very good reason. Protein plays a really big role in how our brain makes and uses neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine. Really happy I got that on the first go. And these are 2 chemicals in our brain that are often out of balance in ADHDers. So these chemicals help regulate things like motivation, focus, and mood, which I hope it goes without saying are often things that are dysregulated in ADHDers. These neurotransmitters, so dopamine and norepinephrine, I'm going to get sciencey for a little bit. So those 2 neurotransmitters are made from amino acids. So these are things such as tyrosine and phenylalanine. Remember those names. So these amino acids, think of them as the building blocks or like the little Lego pieces that make up protein. And this is protein that we get from food in our diet. So the amino acids like tyrosine and phenylalanine, yes, we're going to run with that. So those 2 neurotransmitters, please don't make me say them again. Research shows that these amino acids are, the building blocks for dopamine production. So not only are they just the building blocks for like protein, which is what we're getting for food, but they also involved in producing dopamine, which is the happy chemical in our brain. It's also a really crucial chemical in our brain for attention and impulse control. Need I say more? So some studies have found that, children with ADHD may have lower blood levels of these amino acids or may have issues with how they are getting transported within the brain. So we need to make sure that we're getting them from food to hopefully support these systems as best possible. And in turn, it's going to support things like impulse control, attention, focus, yada, yada, yada. Before we dive in, this episode is brought to you today by Soma Cacao, our go-to for an afternoon pick-me-up that actually does something. Did you know that ceremonial cacao is the richest natural source of magnesium by weight? Because of this, Soma Cacao helps to support nervous system regulation, muscle recovery, and even stress reduction. Use the code WDKY10, that's WDKY10 for 10% off your first order. We'll pop it in the show notes. A huge thanks again to our friends at Soma, and let's dive into today's episode. Getting enough protein across the day is really crucial. I do think there is a tendency for people to really have, quite a zoned in view on getting, a maximum amount of protein from a particular meal. But the thing is that we can only absorb so much protein at a specific point in time. So that's why scattering protein across the day, how many times can I say protein, is really, really crucial. So, that's looking at having a good hit of protein in every single main meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, as well as some protein-rich snacks throughout the day. But I guess with that as well, yes, protein's important across the day, as with any other nutrients. But in particular, there has been a special interest in research around protein intake in the morning, so for breakfast, and what effects that has on the brain of an ADHDer. So especially, I guess, taking a good hit of protein, especially in the morning, can really help with clearer thinking, steadier energy, and even fewer cravings or that like bottomless pit feeling that you might have around food. So there was a study done in 2020 by Brandley and Holton, told you I'm going to get sciencey today, that found that eating a balanced breakfast that included a good source of protein significantly improved memory and attention in students with ADHD. And it wasn't just the ADHD group in this particular study that benefited, everyone did. But it was those with ADHD that saw the most benefits or the greater cognitive gains. So everyone does benefit from, breakfast and protein in the morning. But in ADHDers in particular, this research sort of looked at, it could, I guess they alluded to it could be more beneficial for an ADHD brain to really make sure that they're getting a good hit of protein in the morning. Another expert in this space, Derbyshire, this is actually a forthcoming book, but they have released little snippets of the studies throughout. They've argued that using protein strategically in the morning, particularly during academic or work-related tasks, can really help with focus and emotional regulation. So I'll pop the links to both of these studies in the show notes if you are wanting to learn some more as well. But I just thought I'd include those little tidbits of research so that I'm not making this up. But it's not just about the neurotransmitters. Protein also helps us regulate our blood sugar levels, which is another piece of the puzzle when it comes to focus, energy, and mood. So the more stable or the more consistent, I guess, our blood sugar levels are, the more that we're going to have that sustained supply of energy and, less likely to experience those peaks and troughs that we would otherwise have when we're focusing on mainly, I guess, quicker to digest foods or foods that are higher in a glycemic index. I could go into a whole nother episode on that, but I'm just going to leave it at that for the time being. So ADHD brains are often drawn to, quick carbs or sugary snacks, which can cause our blood sugars to spike and crash, as I said before. And this in turn leads us to feeling, quite wired and really on top of the world, then completely wiped out and absolutely gassed. If you know, right? And again, this is not at all to villainize carbs. Carbs are absolutely essential, where it's in my opinion that they're absolutely essential. But when we're pairing them with things like protein, it's just giving us a more sustained supply of energy, going to help us feel good English, Maddi, better for longer. So, it's that more stable supply of energy, that less of a roller coaster, sort of, more of a cruise control, if you will. Some research even shows that low protein, high sugar diets are more common in children with ADHD, and that higher protein breakfasts have been linked to, better attention and behavior at school. It is, I guess, unfortunate that a lot of the studies around ADHD and nutrition that I found, a lot of them are predominantly in children. However, I do feel like the results can be, sort of applied to adults as well. So I guess that's a little bit of the sciencey side of things when we're looking at protein and ADHD. What does this actually look like in real life? So as always, I guess I would recommend having more protein-rich foods that are ADHD friendly. And often these are things that require, minimal to no preparation time. They're low effort, they're grab and go. They're just those easy things, particularly if you're really busy or, if you're just constantly in chaos like myself. So these are things like eggs. So they can be, boiled or scrambled or on toast, whatever. Greek yogurt or a high-protein plant-based alternative, things like tofu or tempeh if that's your jam, tins of tuna or salmon or sardines or mackerel, Protein powder, not always a big advocate for supplements, but I do think protein powder is one of those things that are just really easy to have, particularly when you're on the go. So protein powder, and you can have that in smoothies or like your overnight oats, say. Cheese is great. I love cheese. I'm a big dairy advocate. Things like edamame or roasted chickpeas. Protein bars, so this can be, store-bought or homemade if you're that way inclined, as well as really utilizing like leftover dinners, particularly, things with like meat or lentils or beans. So really sort of making it a lot easier for yourself, making it, those grab and go easy leftover options. As always, I do like to have an addition versus a reduction approach to nutrition. So what I mean by that is, you don't have to overhaul everything in one day. I really encourage my clients in practice to just focus on one or a couple of different things that they can add more of into their day versus, replacing this for that or taking away this and adding in that. It's more just adding in the good stuff to what you're already doing. All right, so now that we've talked about the what, let's talk about how to actually do the thing, because I do understand that only focusing on the what is half of the equation. And that's something that I really focus on with my clients in session, because yes, it's nice to know what foods and the reasons why and all that jazz. Obviously, it's my job as a dietitian, but I do also understand that talking about the how and looking at how you can actually integrate it as part of your life and making it, realistic and attainable is so, so crucial as well. So when we're talking about, how to make more protein happen, if it's something that you are wanting to take away from today's episode, relying on motivation or planning or memory, it might not always be your strong suit, particularly if you are an ADHDer. So without further ado, today's ADHD-friendly strategy is habit stacking. I almost forgot what it was then. Habit stacking. So for those that are unfamiliar with habit stacking, it's basically when you take a new behavior, if we're using the example of today, having breakfast with a good hit of protein, and attaching it to something that you're already doing consistently, or that's something, I guess that's a part of your routine or habitual. So this way, we're not relying on things like memory or motivation. We're just piggybacking off something that's already a habit and something that already exists as part of your routine. So I'm going to provide some examples. Please by no means feel like you have to do these if they are not applicable to you, but I wanted to provide some real life examples of what this looks like, just so you get a better idea of what I mean. So some examples of habit stacking would be if you make coffee every single morning at home. Awesome. You're making coffee, but you're not having breakfast, and you're just so inspired by today's chat that you want to start having breakfast with protein. You make coffee in the morning, cool. Now let's add a boiled egg and a bit of toast or some yogurt while the kettle boils or while your fancy coffee machine is doing its thing. Another example would be, if you are always doom scrolling on your phone in the afternoon, guilty as charged. Where I guess if we're sort of looking at incorporating more protein into your diet, we could be pairing said doom scroll with a protein bar or a handful of nuts or a pot of Chobani or high protein yogurt. Perfect. Not sponsored by Chobani either, just a big fan. The final example is if you take certain ADHD-related medications in the morning, keep a snack next to them. Keep a grab-and-go breakfast, whether it be an up-and-go or a protein shake or even a sticky note that says breakfast in the fridge, just so you have that extra visual cue to remember. It may sound way too simple or way too good to be true, but trust me, it works, particularly when executive functioning is low. So when we're doing things like habit stacking, we're reducing friction by making, protein or breakfast or whatever habit we're looking at, a part of something that's already almost automatic. So really just piggybacking off something that you're already doing. So I do encourage you to think about, something that you're already doing as part of your day or a part of your morning, if that's something or an area of the day that you are wanting to focus on, and think about maybe where you could slot some food in. Doesn't have to be much to start, but just getting that ball rolling, I think, is really helpful. So to recap, part 1 of 3 of the ADHD Nutrition Mini Series, protein, which was the nutrient of today, in case you missed it, in case you didn't hear me say protein that many times, protein has been very well documented to be so beneficial for ADHD brains because it's been found to support focus, mood, energy, attention span, all of those beautiful things that we want more of in our day. So if you can, try and start your day with a good hit of protein, and also try and sprinkle that through the rest of your day, through the rest of your meals and snacks, not just to help stabilize your blood sugar levels, but to help keep you nice and satisfied for the rest of the day and support, preventing those energy crashes. One strategy that might be helpful to make it easier, or even just to add to your metaphorical tool belt, is habit stacking. So it's piggybacking off something that you're already doing pretty automatic or habitually as part of your day, and pairing something or that new habit with it. So using the example of protein for breakfast, if you always make a cuppa in the morning, adding some breakfast or adding a bit of food alongside that, whether it be putting the actual food next to, the kettle or the coffee machine or whatever, or just a visual cue like a post-it note that says, go get the food in the fridge rather. And remember, as always, it's not about getting it perfect. It's just very much trial and error. I'm offering, one thing to give a go. See how you go. If it sticks, awesome. If it doesn't, that is absolutely okay too, because it's all about experimenting what works for you in real life. So if this episode gave you an aha moment, or, you do like learning a bit more about the ADHD and nutrition side of things, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to message us on Instagram or reply to our latest posts on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well. I really love hearing what lands and what doesn't land as well. So stay tuned. That was part 1 of 3. Next episode of this mini series, we'll be talking about another key nutrient for thriving with ADHD, and also how to calm the chaos. If you liked this episode, it would mean the absolute world to Zeb and I if you could hit that like button, share it with a mate, give us a follow, or even leave a cheeky review. It helps way more than you know. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in part 2.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Be the first to know when the next episode drops by hitting subscribe on wherever you catch your podcasts.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at we don't know yet.pod.
See ya.